Thank you. And Ryan also, and TJ are here. So we're good to go. All right, thanks very much, folks. We may have a shorter than usual meeting today because I think the reports from thermal and biomass are going to be pretty quick. And so why don't we just begin by asking whether there are any other items people want to add to the agenda. And I would seek approval of the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Corrections. Thank you. Any comments or corrections to the minutes from the last meeting? All right, thanks. We will deem them approved. And begin with our conversation on the transportation policy memo. And for that, we have a memo submitted by the task force, the transportation task force, and we understand that that memo, updated memo, incorporates the friendly amendments that were suggested by the administration, Julie Moore and Secretary Flynn. And I should ask whether there's any other stage setting discussion that you would like to have. I'll turn it over to the task force. Joey,
but
TJ has his hand up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
TJ,
just-
you want to?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. Just before we get into that, I wanted to ask for a volunteer to take minutes. Unless you did that before I logged on, I was a couple minutes late. Apologies.
TJ, I failed to do that. Thanks for reminding us.
So Bram has volunteered once already. Joey did it last time. And I think this is as a reminder, it's kind of the current process now for all subcommittees that we need to have a member as a note taker.
I can do it, TJ. It's Liz. I'm off camera because, you know, COVID's in the house. So I figured no one wants to see that, but I'm happy to take notes since I'm the off camera participant.
Great. Thank you, Liz.
No problem.
Important.
Joey, Gina, or
Okay,
can you take us through the memo?
sure. Well, I'm gonna. Yes, let me just.
First of all, today is Joey's birthday.
Oh, thanks, Gina.
Let's be nice to her.
Happy birthday to me.
Throw that out there.
Yeah,
Thanks.
definitely be nice to me. I don't anticipate any meanness, but let's move quickly because it's really beautiful out there. It's a 70-degree day on my birthday, November 3rd. Okay. Okay, just as a reminder in terms of where we're at and what we did. Jane, you want to go first before our stage set? Or are you going to sing to me?
Yes, I'm happy to sing, but I'll save that for celebrating you this weekend. I will ask just maybe that you should, I think it would be good to sort of just talk through process and then you guys talk through the memos. But if you should, you were probably going to do that. So, but I think that this is a little bit of a nebulous like process space that we're in. And so it would be good to acknowledge that and then acknowledge as a group how we're going to try to reconcile that.
Well, I'm happy to talk through process. What I was going to do, Jane, was sort of talk through the last month and a half, what we've been doing, the process that we got to deliver this memo, the process that we took on to deliver this memo, which is an amalgamation of input from a variety of different folks on the transportation task group. And then I also think you're referring to process of, well, what's the process to make a recommendation or ideally, approve this by consensus across sector today, lift it up to the Climate Council and the process for having that conversation there and how it gets attached as an addendum or otherwise to the climate action plan. So maybe the last piece of it, we wait until after we have a conversation about how we got to where we are, and then ideally have a conversation about what's actually in the memo that we want to, that we're proposing to approve and lift up to the Climate Council, and then we can have a conversation about process. I thought you had some thoughts on that. Is that right?
Yeah, Joey, I think having the administration explain the process they went through subsequent to the last Climate Council meeting to review the memo would be helpful for the group to know.
Sure. I mean, what I was going to say is it's just
Someone
to get everyone on the same page, and then happy to turn it over to Jane or TJ or whoever else from this administration. As folks remember, the Transportation Task Group has been meeting regularly, met over the summer. We, on September 12th, I can't remember the exact dates, but cross-sector made a consensus recommendation on the original memo outlining what we would recommend for the Climate Council to consider. And I'm going to drop, that was the memo that, again, cross-sector consensus supported. We lifted it up to the full Climate Council for consideration. Whoops. That's not it. Here it is. And then we had that Climate Council conversation on September 14th. We did the voting process. A couple of folks raised some concerns. They wanted to have input and make recommended changes to the memo. And we continue to have conversations in the Transportation Task Group about other important things like advanced clean cars, advanced clean trucks, the carbon reduction strategy, and then a little bit more of like, what is the sort of our suggested recommendation. On this past Sunday, on the 28th of October, we got input from Secretaries Moore and Flynn, not as a red line to our memo, but as a new memo, sort of with their thoughts on what they'd like to see changes made. That's this memo. And we then met on the next day, on Monday, this past Monday, to review the input from the secretaries and talk through where there was alignment as a task group, what we agreed with. You'll see here in the memo that we have developed, and I want to thank Jared for taking the lead on putting this latest iteration of the memo together. This latest iteration of the memo, which is what we're going to be talking about today and ideally deciding on and ideally lifting up for the full council, reflects the input from Secretaries Moore and Flynn, and Jane has noted, I think reflects the administration's view of what they'd like to see in the transportation space as an addendum to the climate action plan or whatever this is. This is part of the process conversation. As you will see in most of the bullets we took, and Jared, I will let you speak to this because you actually did, and I didn't do a direct comparison. We took the most of the bullets verbatim, if not almost verbatim, input from Secretaries Moore and Flynn. I think they were important changes, and one addition to our bullets that acknowledged, in terms of action steps and next steps, the support of the state's equitable build out of highway, multi-unit dwellings, community and workplace charging. So Secretaries Moore and Flynn made an important addition there. So that's where we tried to put together a memo that reflected a significant amount of the input that we got from the secretaries, and then also add a little bit more context, as you will see, as Jared laid out, the process that we went through to get to this point. And then I think the ongoing recognition from the non-administration entities on the task group that it is really important to recognize, and we reinserted a sentence that speaks to, I'm just going to read it, the only currently known policy options for which there is strong evidence from other states, provinces, and countries of the ability to confidently deliver the scale and pace of emissions reductions that are required in the transportation sector by the Global Warming Solutions Act are one or a combination of the cap and invest, cap and reduce policy covering transportation fuels, or performance-based regulatory approach. So that's the primary difference, but Jared, Jane, or others can put a finer point on what I just want to articulate as a primary difference between the two memos. Our original version that cross-sector advanced up, and what Secretaries Moore and Flynn came back with in terms of some very helpful changes that we incorporated, and what you are looking at now. It's a little confusing because they're not radically different, but the one distinct difference is that sentence that I dropped in the chat, or actually the latest iteration of that sentence. Jared or Jane, Jane, do you want to say anything more about the process the administration went through, or Jared, do you want to correct me as the primary author of this latest report memo?
Nope, I thought that was a good overview. So happy to defer to Jane to say anything that she wants.
So yeah, so I alluded to this being a little bit of a funny process in that now you have lifted up a memo previously to the Climate Council as a consensus cross-sector mitigation memo to be considered as an addendum to the Climate Action Plan. I just want to highlight that there's broad agreement across the administration and the task group and all of you that the recommendations contained within the memo are it will advance the conversation around transportation policy in the state. I will highlight that the majority of the recommendations in the memo are not additions to the Climate Action Plan. They're reframing of what's already in the Climate Action Plan and a restatement of them in new ways. The only really substantive addition is a recommendation around emissions reporting program, which I think we've come to really appreciate that in lieu of policies in the thermal sector and the transportation sector, that an emissions reporting program is a really necessary and critical next step in having the accurate data and data needed to stand up a policy in any sector. And so that, or even independent of whether a policy comes, that data is critical in tracking progress and reporting out progress on climate change through existing programs and having a more refined greenhouse gas inventory in order to speak to that. So we feel strongly that that additional recommendation is a critical next step across all mitigation programs and policies, and that really is important to highlight here. So I don't want to not sort of really take in that the critical recommendations put forward in this memo are supported across all of us. But I will say that the time it took to sort of reach a redlined edit with the administration and come back was unfortunate, but that as written and as framed up with the language around pointing to the cap and invest in the performance standard as in the memo will not be supported by the administration. And that's in line, and we had signaled that from the beginning in the task group, largely because the administration didn't support the inclusion of TCIP in the Climate Action Plan, and this is sort of a similar track and vein. So how this then carries forward now from cross-sector is a question for all of you, appreciating that the recommendations enjoy broad consensus and that the challenge continues to be sort of the framing of that. And I think that the position continues to be that we are now investing in the technical analyses for this sector through the carbon reduction strategy that Andrea can speak to in much greater detail than me, through Agency of Transportation, that will get us a more refined understanding of how far the programmatic levers will get us in this sector. We acknowledge that as well, that technical analyses to date signal that we won't be able to get far enough with existing programs and policies, but that carbon reduction strategy is needed to understand that gap further, and then also understand if there is a cost-effective policy to actually apply in Vermont, knowing that TCIP is not an option right now. So what is that next step policy? And the CRS will help signal that. So we're just, I think the language, and I'll put it in the chat, that Julie and Joe, Secretary Moore and Secretary Flynn often offered in their memo states that the CRS is sort of needed to realize the CRS before we point and signal to what the policy is. So others in the administration should feel like if they want to add anything, but I also just want to sort of hone in on, for me, that these recommendations are a really critical next step, and like it would be great to see them supported strongly by the council across the board. And the problem will be the memo that is leading up to it won't, and that will be a conversation at the council and a debate about how the rest of it gets carried forward.
Thanks, Jane. Bram?
Yeah, I just also wanted to say that in the task group, we sort of had a frank discussion about the fact that there is a group of members who, sort of don't believe there is any other known way to get the emissions we need other than the two outlined in that sentence: cap, trade, reduce, invest, or performance standard. And there's a group of counselors or members who feel that making that definitive a statement is not something they can vote for. What we do as a subcommittee in terms of voting on this memo and moving it to the full council, and what the council does is one of the questions before us. I think as Jane said, there is kind of broad consensus on a lot of the recommendations, and Secretary Moore and Secretary Flynn's rewrite sort of specifically said, hey, there's a lot of stuff we all agree on. Here's a bunch of big important stuff we agree on, and we can make it better. And they edited out the stuff that they didn't feel they could support, which, when you combine them, you get back to a place where there's all these recommendations that pretty much everybody thinks are important. And there is that one long sentence that the administration representatives have been very clear about, as Jane said, since even TCI, before TCI got put on hold, was not something that was supported, and that's where we are.
Thanks, Bram. Gina, and then Jared.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that one of the main differences here is the timing of any recommendations in the CRS. And in my opinion, we've talked about this. These policies need to be stated because it's all we know right now. We don't know exactly what they'll be like or whether they'll even work, but they need to be on the table for the CRS. So the point of difference is, yes, we got to wait for the CRS to give us the background, but the Climate Council should continue to put on the table what we know works in other states and may work here. It doesn't mean we're going to do it. It just means we have to keep the conversation alive and can't stop talking about these things and wait another year for the CRS. And I'm on the technical advisory committee for that. And they're taking a deep dive into VTrans programs, which is incredibly fascinating. But at the end of the day, I don't know how much effect that's going to actually have on the climate plan, on our plan. We need to wait for that next phase that will then dig into the policies. But it doesn't mean we don't stop talking about the policies. And I don't understand why the administration is adverse to not at least having them on the table. And then I'll turn it over to Jared.
Jared.
Thanks, Gina. Yeah, I just want to offer some additional context. I think from my perspective, the fundamental disagreement here or difference in kind of opinion or approach is, I'll just speak for myself. I believe that as a council and as individual councilors, we have a responsibility to meet the legal requirements in the Global Warming Solutions Act. There was significant research done in terms of the policies and performance of other states, provinces, and countries around the United States, around North America, around the world. in terms of what policy options actually exist to, with a high degree of confidence and at the scale and pace required by the Global Warming Solutions Act, have proven to be able to confidently reduce emissions at that scale and pace. And there are two broad policy categories that emerge from there. Emissions caps, which come in different flavors: cap and invest, cap and reduce, cap and trade. There are different variations of those, everything from Transportation and Climate Initiative to Western Climate Initiative to Oregon's program. And then there are the performance standards, alternately known as low carbon fuel standards, clean transportation standards, clean fuel standards. Those are the suites of policy options that can give real confidence. And I think that what we need to be willing to do is, even if it's politically inconvenient, say what the facts and the evidence show us at this point in time, unless there is a different option, policy option on the table that we did not find. None has ever been offered by the members of the administration who are critiquing this language. So they're saying, we don't agree with it, but we're not gonna, we don't have an offer of, here's another policy option that can do what we're legally required to do with evidence from other states. And so to me, I think it's fairly straightforward that, this is what the evidence shows. It may be a politically inconvenient statement, but our job as counselors is to meet legal requirements, be transparent, and be honest about what's necessary. So I also find it surprising I think that we are all hopeful that there will be valuable analysis coming out of the carbon reduction strategy analysis that VTrans is doing. However, I want to set some context about what is moving forward now and the scale of emissions reduction that is expected from it. So from the analysis, Megan, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from our last task group call, from what Megan and Colin shared, is that the latest analysis that ANR commissioned from NESCOM to assess the emissions reduction highest potential, assuming that every single vehicle that is required to be delivered to Vermont as part of Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks is put into service and displacing fossil vehicles, assuming that the best case scenario for that, those regulations are estimated to achieve about 34%, just about a third of the emissions reductions needed from the transportation sector by 2030. So we still have this massive gap of 2/3 of the emissions that we don't know how are going to be reduced, and will likely, I think the work of this task group is pointing to, we cannot have a high degree of confidence that they will be reduced without these supplemental and complementary policies beyond Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. Now, the carbon reduction strategy, what it is doing in this first phase is just looking at the emissions implications of VTrans capital program. And I'm going to quote directly from the Cambridge Analytics, the consultant that is working on this. They note in their proposed scope of work that was shared that it is hard to move the needle much just through the types of investment choices normally included in a transportation agency's capital program. So I do not think anyone expects that the analysis of the budget of VTrans is going to uncover significant emissions reductions that we're not aware of, let alone 2/3 of the remaining gap beyond Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. And so I think if I can speak for most of the members of the Transportation Task Group, we felt a responsibility then point to what does the evidence suggest can make up that gap. And my understanding of the carbon reduction strategy was that because we all anticipated that there is this remaining gap, then we want to see further analysis of the ways to structure the exact types of policies that we're pointing to in terms of cap and invest or performance standard, not whether or not they're necessary. Because I think that if we're being honest about being able to confidently achieve these reduction targets, I would challenge anybody to say that given the research we've done, the information we have at hand, that we're going to confidently meet the transportation sector emissions reductions without one or both of those two policies that we point to, because there's no evidence anywhere else in the world that we've seen that it will work.
Thanks, Jared. Dave?
Thanks, Rich. My comments are consistent with what Jared and Gina and Joey have observed. I'll be really brief. It's perplexing to me that we wouldn't want to acknowledge and then incorporate in our recommendations a sustainable funding mechanism for meeting Global Warming Solutions Act transportation emissions goals. I don't understand why we wouldn't do that. This is our best thinking on the topic, as Jared just pointed out. As noted, this went into the climate action plan because that was our best thinking on the topic. And in my opinion, it should continue to go in here and not be removed.
All right, thanks, Dave. Any further comments on this? I'm gonna, Liz.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I get it. It sounds like it's not really just that sentence, right? I mean, because to Dave's point a second ago, it's really the already voted on and already a part of the climate action plan overall recommendation related to a program like the TCPEI that, you know, itself didn't go forward. But so sitting here listening, I was thinking, well, I wonder what the administration proposed instead of that sentence. And so I guess while I'll ask the question, my guess is there wasn't a proposal that was rejected. It was just, it's really the whole kind of surrounding section, right? Not just this sentence. So that thinking about solutions, my head goes toward the subcommittee recommending this memo. Potentially, I support it. I think it makes sense, including the language that we've just been talking about. And asking the Climate Council to adopt the consensus part below, like in other words, pointing out that everyone agrees on the next steps. There's got to be a way we can say the subcommittee supports this, everybody agrees on the next steps, and we want that reflected, and there's no kind of changes needed or recommended by this subcommittee on the climate action plan itself, because this builds upon that, as I think Jane said. Because I wouldn't want to see this as some sort of, you know, secondary way to change the original recommendations, which I think is the fear that I think I'm hearing. So anyway, I don't know, that's a long way of saying it sounds like it's not just the sentence. And if so, there's got to be a way we can frame that to make clear the overall recommendations have consensus, even if that initial language does not, for the same reasons the climate action plan itself was adopted by majority, but not unanimous vote.
Thanks, Liz. I'll hear from TJ and then I'm going to make a procedural recommendation. TJ?
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, Liz, because I think they're very practical. Excuse me. And that's kind of where I was heading in terms of, you know, the substantive recommendations seems like there's consensus on, and it's not clear to me where we, what additional value is achieved by including kind of this framing that essentially is part of the initial climate action plan already. And so, you know, in moving forward these practical recommendations, that you know, that's really the meat of what we want to move forward, right? And where we need to start taking action, and everybody agreed on that. So I guess I'm not sure why you know, having that sentence in is so critical. And I would look towards a process where we can move those, make sure we move the substantive pieces that where we actually are making progress and can take action. That seems to me the important thing here. And And those pieces, I think, go towards actually getting the most cost-effective mitigation reductions that we can. So.
Okay, let me make a procedural suggestion and then invite comments on that. Andrea, do you want to?
Well, I guess to TJ's point there, I would like to understand better what is expected to come from this memo that isn't already an expectation from what's in the plan already, or what we'll achieve through the carbon reduction strategy. What's the value other than that tracking, the new one? What is the value in the memo? What's it going to get us?
Someone from the task group want to answer that? Jared?
Yes.
I-
Jared, you want to go?
Yeah.
I think the importance of that whole context setting introductory section and that specific sentence is that is a distillation, a summary of over a year of work and research into the policy options that are out there to be able to achieve our legal requirements. And so we're pointing to what our research showed, what the current evidence shows of what options, one or both of which are, given what we know now, necessary to have confidence that we meet those requirements, rather than just skipping over what we learned and saying, here's what's going to happen in the next year that's already planned by the carbon reduction strategy and that's already underway. It's saying we may not have a fully developed proposal for a emissions cap program or a performance standard program and exactly how it would work yet. Maybe that will be more refined and further developed through the analysis in phase 2 of the carbon reduction strategy. But what we know now, and it's important for decision makers to know now, including legislators, is that if we want to have any degree of confidence that we can meet our legal requirements, it will likely require one or both of those two proven policy options that were identified in the research. If we leave that out, then all we're doing is going in circles about saying we're going to do analysis, then we're going to do more analysis, then we're going to realize that there's still a emissions gap and we're not on track to meet our emissions reduction requirements. It's not summarizing the practical information of the direction in which we need to head for policymakers. It buries the lead in process and further analysis rather than pointing to the scale and type of action and the type of policy action that those of us who feel like the legal requirements are necessary to meet, are identifying.
All right, I guess I would just argue that is already in the climate action plan.
Well, the fact of the matter is the Climate Council, when we approved the plan, said, transportation, go look at this and come back to us. And there was a spring date and we missed that. Now we have a fall date. We need to keep these issues alive and on the table. We can't just assume that somebody's going to go back to the climate action plan and read those details. Our job on the transportation group is to keep the conversation alive. There's an immense amount of research that needs to be done on these topics. We began to scratch away at that. We didn't have the resources. So we need to keep the need alive with the administration, with the legislature, to be able to dig into these topics. We need to keep it alive so that when the climate strategy, VTrans's climate strategy public process moves ahead, we need to be at the table and say, hey, we've reaffirmed why this is important. It needs to be part of the analysis that the Cambridge Systematics is doing. I'm concerned that if we just don't talk about this, it's going to get less and less relevant to people and not in the public eye and in the eye of the Climate Council.
So thanks everybody for your comments. I'll take a couple more comments and then I think we should move to a resolution. Bram and then Joey.
I would say thinking slightly differently about this than Gina is. And, we had a climate plan that, I just pulled it up. It in fact includes TCIP. But, I disagree that the point is to make sure that we keep talking about it. I think we got to do it, right? Like, we do not have time to talk anymore. It's 70 degrees out there and it's November 3rd and we're in Vermont, right? Like, we are in catastrophe, in the middle of catastrophe. And there are a lot of possible outcomes where this lands. There are no good ones, but there's a range from bad to really bad. And the faster we act, the more we can push where we land to the less bad end of the bad range of outcomes. And we said, hey, TCIP is in the plan, but that's been postponed indefinitely. God only knows if it'll ever happen. Therefore, we need to do something different, not talk about something different. We need to do something different. And we have in front of us two possible ways to do something different from TCIP that will get us where we need to go. I think the carbon reduction strategy, VTrans just built this really cool roundabout at the bottom of my street in Burlington. It's going to reduce emissions at that intersection by, I don't know, 15%, 20%, something like that. One little intersection, 65% overall, right? Like, it's hard to imagine, as the Cambridge Analytics report has said, and as sort of using our own brains to imagine how changing traffic flow and being more efficient is going to impact emissions, that the carbon reduction strategy will have a large and meaningful contribution to reducing overall emissions. So, I think that what we want to do is, as we were charged with, returning to the council with a recommendation of what to do instead of TCIP, and making our best pitch as to, hey, this is, with some disagreement among us, this is our majority best thinking on what we do instead of TCIP, and ask the council to vote to incorporate that into the climate action plan and send the revised version to the legislature and the administration for action.
Thank you, Bram. Joey, any last words here?
I appreciate that, Bram, and I also would just add, and open to your procedural approach, Rich, just that, I think I look at I agree that we need to point in a direction. I don't see what's in the carbon reduction strategy and the work there and what's already in the climate action plan is mutually exclusive from what we're talking about, and sort of the concept and the sentence that we're just working around. I look at that sentence as an affirmation of the facts, that what we know today. And I am just concerned that if we're unwilling to acknowledge that this is what is happening globally and nationally, to make certain pollution reduction progress in line with the law, which is in line with the science, as opposed, I just would have concerns about that. I agree that, TCIP is in the plan. If it's not going to be TCIP, and if other states who are in similar positions to us don't work to resurrect it, it's going to have to be something else. And I know that there is a lot of interest in relying heavily on advanced clean cars and advanced clean trucks, which just won't get us there in line with the law, and is a vehicular-based strategy when we know we need to be diversifying our transportation system for all the different benefits that it provides. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that what we know today and what's working nationally, internationally, in other jurisdictions is along the lines of a sentence like that. And I think that I agree that we need to move on the different action elements that are now improved from the input from Secretaries Moore and Flynn. And I think I'm open to your proposal, Rich, on process, but I do think it's important to acknowledge, like we have tried to do here, what's working and how it is, what's needed to make certain progress.
Okay, then. It seems that there's a fair amount of clarity among committee members about, both parts of this memo. And it seems then, but I'm going to ask for a vote. It seems that there is consensus support for the memo as a whole, except for the sentence that we've been talking about. And for the bulleted recommendations, there is consensus support. And it would be important, I think, for the committee to report that to the council. So I'm going to ask for a confirming vote on that. Similarly, there seems to be a clear division of opinion with respect to the point we've been debating, the sentence that begins the only currently known policy options. And the rest of that paragraph. And it's important that we report to the council the committee's recommendation on the inclusion of that language. And so I would ask for a vote on the full memo with that language included. So it seems to me we could have two votes. One that would be in support of the memo as drafted completely. And the second would be a clear statement of support, if there is one, for all the other recommendations in the memo. And we could report both of those to the council. People have
Rich,
comments on that.
And I'm sorry to say a single word here, but it might be helpful, or it might be really stupid. Should we split this into proposed amendment 1 that includes all the stuff we all agree on, and proposed amendment 2 that has the stuff that we don't all agree on, and vote on each of those separately? And perhaps one of them will pass out unanimously and one of them will pass out with significant minority no votes, and we can report that up to the council.
Well, I was thinking, Bram, that it would be better to have the second vote be for the full memo and not just for the controversial paragraph, so that a reader will see the entire thing. But you and I are saying essentially the same thing. Liz?
One question and then one suggestion. Was there any proposed revision to the sentence we're talking about from folks in the administration?
No, I think what was a little bit challenging, and I think remains challenging, is that instead of a red line edit to the memo, we got a different memo, and that sentence or anything akin to that sentence doesn't exist. So no.
I got it. And Jane's putting in chat. Jane, are you intending to say that sentence about the CRS getting completed was not a revision, but a reason why striking it was what the administration wanted, essentially, is what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
Cool. So, okay, so a suggestion potentially, because when I hear that, just as non-task group member, but subcommittee member hearing that, when I hear that, what I hear is you think future work could change the potential policy outcomes, and you don't want to preclude that by putting something in this memo. And you also probably, and this is just me saying this, don't want to be seen as changing the stance of the administration with respect to something that was voted on last year. Jane, I think you actually acknowledged that earlier. So would it be possible potentially to just vote the memo out as is with a single change? And that is to add a phrase at the beginning of that sentence that says something like, as the majority of the Climate Council determined when adopting the cap last December, comma. Makes the sentence even longer, but it allows the administration folks who did not vote for the cap in the first place to, you know, have the benefit of not being included since it's referring to a prior vote. And the restating and reframing of that point, I think would still be in line with what the task group members were looking for. So anyway, I'll offer that.
All right, I'll take that as a proposed amendment to the memo, and we'll discuss that. Jared?
I really appreciate Liz's attempt to find a way forward. And I wish I could just say that, yes, we should do that. However, I don't think it's accurate to say that the full Climate Council, when we voted on the climate action plan last year, recommended one or both of a cap and invest or a performance standard program. We really just pointed to TCIP, which is just one example of a cap and invest program. And so again, this I think goes back to the previous point that this sentence is sharing new information that is the distillation of all the research the Transportation Task Group did. I don't think we really pointed to a performance standard as an option on the table in the initial cap, but we are wanting to include that now. So I appreciate the creative idea, but I don't think it would actually be accurate to begin this.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just looking for a way to get at the concern. And so, and it doesn't sound like the administration offered something that would actually allow the language to continue while saying something like, you know, while the administration would suggest, or whatever the right word is, that the actual policy choice be made after the CRS, comma, blah, blah, blah. There was no actual amendment proposed, which for me sort of answers the question. And I would prefer to just vote for the memo as is in light of that. And it's too bad, frankly, because it feels like that could have been.
Okay, then. Let's take Liz, I'm going to take your recommendation as a motion and ask whether there's a second.
Yeah, I'll second it.
So, I'm letting people know in advance that I'm suggesting that we should have 2 votes because I think this conversation can be, conveyed accurately to the council if we do it twice. So I wanted people to know in advance that they will have a chance to vote for the consensus recommendations in just a moment. But let's just take a vote among committee members for the memo as drafted. All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
And that includes me. And opposed?
No. Opposed.
No.
Okay,
No.
I'm sorry. And who, the minute takers should take care here to make sure that the opposing votes are registered.
Can we just have people write it in the chat, Rich? Is that possible? Yes or no?
Sure.
Okay, so I think I'm getting the DPS, ANR, AOT representatives no. Everyone else is yes. Is that correct? For them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and
Rich,
yes,
before we go down that road in terms of what you were suggesting,
Mhm.
I think one of the challenges I have, well, I very much agree with and support the next steps articulated. I kind of have a little bit of a concern that some of them will rely on funding, long-term funding that we might not have. So I'm not like that, participation in the Transportation and Climate Initiative was not going to only reduce emissions, but it was going to create a more long-term sustainable revenue stream for ongoing investments in a more diversified transportation system. Yes, we have things like the American Rescue Plan Act, Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and the funding that is through those programs. And yes, we will have the Inflation Reduction Act. I do not believe we have any confidence that if we maximized all of those things, it will add up to deliver the progress, as Jared noted earlier, that we're going to need. So I just have a little bit of concern about this strategy because I think it presupposes that we will have the resources and capacity to do that with the policies and the regulatory tools that we have or don't have, if you see what I'm saying.
that's fine. Really, all I was looking for was the opportunity for the committee to speak clearly to the council and report that there was no objection to the other recommended steps that are contained in the memo. And we can do that orally. We don't need to take a vote to do that, if that's your concern.
Yeah, I guess what I'm just trying to say, and it's maybe not that big of a deal or a point, but like this here about talking about the building out the EV, charging infrastructure to serve, multi-unit dwellings and workplace. We have revenues to do that. They're not going to be enough. And so I'm just saying unless there isn't, somebody has a different view than I, that existing revenues and existing resources, if we maximize them, can deliver that in the way that we have articulated here.
Well, that's the reason that's the reason that your task force wanted to include the language that we've been debating. But I think you're basically restating that point. So I will just ask whether someone would state that there is not consensus on supporting the other bullet points that are contained in the memo, because earlier in this conversation, pretty much everybody said the rest of the memo is fine. So we can report that to the council. We can do that orally. I don't require a vote. I'm just, I wanted to give people the opportunity to confirm that. Jared?
Yeah, as I think about this a little bit more personally, and I don't know, I'd be curious if others agree, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable voting on, what essentially would be a memo without the punchline, with a missing piece. It would feel very incomplete to me. So what I would recommend, I think, is the direction you were just going, Rich, which is we report out the vote as it just occurred and give the opportunity to those who voted against it to explain why, in which they could say, these are the parts of the memo that we do support. This is the part of the memo that caused us to vote no. Rather, I would just feel comfortable voting yes on something that feels incomplete, because it would, yeah.
Thank you. Wait, I take your comments as a better path. Thank you. And we can do that. All right, well then anything further by way of wrap up on this transportation memo, just so people understand, it will be taken to the Climate Council at the next Climate Council meeting. Jane?
I think this all sounds good on process and structure. I do just want to highlight, Andrea was drawing my attention to just the distinction, and I don't think it needs to change anything, but the way the cap is written right now actually does highlight a performance standard or other cap and invest programs to be investigated in parallel to TCIP. And so the distinction that it isn't in the cap now is actually not accurate. So I do just want to highlight that. I don't think it changes anything for this conversation, perhaps, but we can put in the chat the actual language in the cap. It does actually reference all of the existing programs as you have it stated in the memo right now.
Thanks, Jane. Any further conversation on this topic? All right, I want to thank everybody for their thoughtful contributions to this conversation. Not easy, and but I think it's productive conversation, and we have a memo that we can now forward to the council. And thanks to the task group for all their work on it, and to the administration for recommending improvements to it. Our agenda calls for taking public comment on this topic now. We're probably off schedule. I haven't looked in a while. This just went on a while. But we probably should take public comments on this topic. Annette.
Yes, this is Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment. I wonder if someone would be willing to do like an elevator speech and explain to the average Vermonter what you just did and why you did it.
Graham?
Happy to try. So the original climate action plan included an important component of the transportation emissions reductions, which was to join the TCI Transportation Climate Initiative program. A week before the report was due, a couple of states pulled out of the Transportation Climate Initiative. So that was not currently a viable option. And since we had 1 week, we acknowledged the fact that an important component of the transportation emissions reduction plan had been put on hold, and the council asked the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee to recommend a replacement for that component, which is what we have been working on for the last few months. And what we have come back with is not a specific, not a recommendation to join a specific program, but a memo that says, here are the programmatic areas that would get us there. And among those two broad areas, it is still open to choose a particular program or set of programs that will get us there, but it's simply identifying the two big areas where such programs exist currently in the world. We did go out of our way to note that we are aware that something new may appear next year as the technology is rapidly evolving, or 2 years from now. But at the moment, there are two main policy options, areas of policy options, and the memo identifies those, along with a number of specific enhancements or improvements to the plan. And we voted to advance that from the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee and propose it as a recommendation to the full Climate Council. This is the floor where I get off.
Thanks, Graham. All right, we should move on to other task group reports. Are reports from the thermal task group.
Thanks, Rich.
Dave?
Very briefly, we're currently reviewing responses. There are 2 to the RFP that was issued by the administration. Comments should be completed by November 7, which I believe is next Monday. And for any more information, specific information, I would ask Jane to fill in that very brief report.
Jane had to sign off, but I don't think there's anything else to add beyond that, Dave. I think we're just kind of waiting to get through the contracting, selection and contracting process at this point.
Thank you.
Biomass task group. Where I know you've been meeting. What's the latest?
I can give a brief update. The biomass task group has had a series of lengthy working meetings, and I see Adam is here as well, so feel free to jump in, Adam. We met most recently as yesterday in person, which was great, to continue working on the set of recommendations that had been previously drafted by a subset of the task group members. And those include contemplating further study that needs to be conducted related to feasibility of using biomass for electricity generation in the state of Vermont. And we're obviously focusing on issues related to public health and local forest economy and other issues. We didn't quite get to a point where we were ready to move the recommendations yesterday. So we're continuing to do some drafting work and editing work. And we'll continue that next week. And I think the idea is to engage with the broader subcommittees once we've had an opportunity to finish that drafting work more thoroughly. Hopefully after next week, we're going to be meeting for another 3-hour window on Wednesday. And Adam, if I missed anything or any important detail there, I know that was pretty general. So.
No, that covered it. I would just say that we're probably, I think we're halfway through a series of draft recommendations and have gotten to consensus on roughly half of those recommendations. So we have a few more to go, but we're making progress.
Thank you. I think that concludes the reports from our task groups. Is there anything further for committee members to report? Joey?
Well, just, I don't know if Megan, you might want to just provide a brief update for everyone. The A&R delivered on time, the responsiveness summary on the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks public input, and that's real big and real important. And so Megan, having done the lion's share of that work, can you share that good news and the process you anticipate going forward?
Sure, and I put a link in the chat to the where folks can access our most updated rulemaking documents that we filed on Tuesday. So for folks that are not familiar with rulemaking processes in Vermont, the next step after, so we just went through our public engagement phase where we had the proposed rule and the supporting material out for public comment. That ended on September 30th. The A&R team, in coordination with our other agency partners who have expertise in this area, responded to those comments and updated our supporting material and did update a few places in the regulatory text itself. All those materials, as I said, can be found at that link that I just posted. And our next step is to meet with the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rulemaking, and that right now is scheduled to take place on November 17th. I expect the conversation might continue to subsequent meetings of that committee, but obviously not sure. And we are still hoping to be able to file the adopted rule by December 1st, which is the timeline in the Global Warming Solutions Act for which A&R has to adopt the rules contemplated in the Climate Action Plan, of which these 4 rules were contemplated in the climate action plan. So that's what we're doing. We're hoping to stay on time. We, at the very latest, would like to file by the end of the year for other Clean Air Act compliance related issues. So that's our plan. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Okay, TJ.
Yeah, I just, the electric sector wasn't on the agenda as a task group report, but I wanted to mention to folks that the department, as you know, this summer put out a request for input on a process for reviewing our renewable and clean electricity policies and programs. And we have synthesized the results of or the feedback that we received and published that. We're working with the public engagement task group of the Just Transitions Committee to forge a path forward with a public engagement plan. But I will, after this meeting, send a link out to everybody sharing the results of that. It's in they're framed in a PowerPoint slide, so it's a quick review, but generally, in terms of time frame, the weight of the comments pointed us towards a longer process, not trying to rush to get something done and prepared for this legislative session, but to have something prepared for the 2024 legislative session and outlined a broad array of stakeholders and methods to use to move forward. And we're going to try and act on that, and in the next couple of weeks publish an actual plan for what we're going to do over the next 6 to 9 months. So, when I send that out, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks, TJ. All right, we have a few moments for any public comments on the committee reports. All right then, I don't see any. Any further business for the committee today? We might have the opportunity to give Joey an extra 50 minutes on her birthday, and everybody else another 50 minutes to enjoy what Joey has called the creepy but wonderful warm weather of early November.
Creepily warm. It's creepily warm.
Okay.
But lovely.
We
Yep.
are adjourned. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.